All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started here. I see we have one person just connecting to the audio. So I think we've got six of the teams represented here, 6 or 7. So welcome. I want to thank you all for showing up here today, and big congratulations for moving forward in the competition. We're very excited to be working with the finalists. It was a very difficult judging time, and we had some really great competitors. And so if you're in the final group, then that was definitely is a sign of making really good progress on what you're working on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about phase 4, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. And always remember that we have office hours that we offer up fairly regularly, usually weekly, sometimes it's every other week. And so we have a schedule for that, and so be sure and log into those if you have questions at any time. We try to make ourselves very available for you to answer questions as things move forward, so that you're not waiting around and wondering about something. So let me share my screen here, and we'll get started. Okay, so always my reminder screen, this is the end goal for the competition. So this is what we're looking for in terms of finalists out of this competition, looking at issues of being able to deploy this kind of technology without pre-deployed infrastructure to do tracking to 1 meter accuracy and XYZ at a minimum, and then make sure it's going to be robust for first responder use cases, affordable and scalable. I think those are all really important things for the teams to keep in mind as we move forward, and our judging will become more rigorous across all the different elements. Today we're going to go through some administrative matters, quick review of phase 3 judging, phase 4 requirements, encouraging team growth in the portal, and then next steps and wrap up. Just a reminder, this is Indiana University is administering this competition on behalf of NIST PSCR through a cooperative agreement. And anything we say in these conversations, if we mention a product or anything like that, that's not an endorsement, it's just used for reference or for example. So we take a technology agnostic view with the competition. In our judging and in our reviews, we don't have preferential treatment of any particular approach or technology. It's about creating the best possible solution for the first responder market. So if we mention something, it's not an endorsement, it's just as an example. Reminder of who's managing this: Indiana University's Crisis Technologies Innovation Lab, where I work, and several people on the call. We're also in partnership with the Resultant, the Indiana IoT Lab, Generator, and the R2 Network, and of course the funding. And we collaborate with Indiana Task Force 1, which is a FEMA search and rescue team, Indianapolis Fire Department, Bloomington Fire Department. Even though there's mostly fire representation in those groups, this competition is aimed at all public safety use cases. So we're not just fire focused, although that is obviously a big use of this kind of technology. Today, primary speakers will be myself and then Jason Pennington, who chairs our first technology expert panel. So basically, that group helps drive the technical direction of the competition. So Jason will be speaking later about phase 4 and as we move forward. Again, mentioned this earlier, always keep in mind the focus of the competition. This is what the judges look for. And we're looking across all these metrics as we move forward in the competition. We've been more focused on the technical aspects in the earlier phases, just can you make it work? But as we go forward, we are really looking towards the teams moving these concepts into marketable prototypes, things, technologies that actually can be used in field by first responders on the job. And so as the judges are looking at this, about 50% of the judges are first responders or retired first responders, and about half are technologists. Some of those overlap there in both categories. They're former first responders who are now technologists or first responders who have a technology bent. So everybody who's judging these has a deep level of expertise around the issues and the technologies appropriate to solving this problem of indoor tracking. So let's talk about some administrative stuff. Phase 3 judging. We're gonna start discussing less about the solutions that teams are providing in these kickoffs for this phase and the next phase, because we view it as your intellectual property and your right to share what kinds of technologies you're using, the approaches you're taking, so you can decide through things like your public abstract, your public video, other things you might do, how much you want to share about your solution. So what I will say about the phase 3 judging is, and this came straight from table 1 and on page 8 of the rules, list the kinds of metrics we're looking at. So obviously location tracking, it was important. So as we looked at the phase 3 judging and the kinds of things that the judges were talking about, they all fit under one of these categories. Accuracy of tracking, is it easy to deploy? Is it currently, or the potential for it to be robust and ruggedized? Realize most of your prototypes are not robust or ruggedized at this point, but can you get there? Does it look like it's going to work? Is it easy to use? Is the user experience, the usability of the product, it appears to be cost feasible, affordable? Are you starting to move towards business planning? One of the things we're going to be extremely interested in is this going to become a real product that you can really sell out to the market. And accessibility and interoperability. Is this a standalone, or is it going to fit into the technology capability stack that the first responder community is using, or where that field seems to be going? And so I encourage you not only to look at the phase 4 rules, which Jason will go over in a few minutes, but also go back to the upfront part of the rules document where we talk about the goals and the approach and things like this table 1, and think through, are you really conveying all of these aspects of your prototype, your design, your plans, and have you thought through all of those things? Because the judges will be discussing those things. And the end of this phase 4, we'll down select to 6 teams. That's 40% of the teams will be eliminated again. We just eliminated 60% of the teams. So you want to make sure you're strong across all these aspects of it. Prize distribution. If you have any questions, you've got Haley's email on the screen here. Email her. She can help you get everything straight. Basically, just email her, let her know there are no updates to your paperwork, or if you need to change your eligibility verification or award distribution form, then you can change those or re-register in the IU system if you need to change, like where checks are going, things like that. The travel prize part of the funds will be held until we get confirmation you're going to attend phase 4. So sometime in January, you'll get an email asking you to verify your attendance to the phase 4 competition. At that point, Haley will start working to process the check for the travel. So we want confirmation that you're actually going to attend the event before providing the travel funds. Once we have both of these currently, knowing that there's no updates to your information, or later on the prize travel confirmation, Haley will process the check through the Indiana University system. And I think everyone's responded now, but if there's some issues with the generator program, please let us know ASAP so that we can include you in that program if you're planning to participate. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jason, and Jason can start talking about anything he might want to say about phase 3 judging, but primarily focused on phase 4. And Jason, you're still muted.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you. And again, from my side, congratulations, everyone that's attending this afternoon. As Sunny said, I'm Jason Pennington, representing the Indiana IoT Lab, and fortunate enough to work on this team to support a lot of the technical background of our not only competitions, but also office hours and the judging platforms behind the competition. If you can advance. So between phase 3 and phase 4, we wanted to put this out here as a little bit of a process summary of, and there's some differences here. So in the past, between phases 1 through 3, generally speaking, the white lines in the middle, the submissions came in, they were validated for completeness, more or less the robustness of the application and submittal itself. And then that got passed once we basically passed that quality gate into the subject matter expert review. The subject matter expert review would then essentially create some recommendation that was a written feedback on the submittal itself, and then suggest, pass, advance, defer, some overall recommendations to the team. Those informations essentially then went to the judges for a deliberation. So in the background, Josh, myself, others were more or less creating rankings and so forth based on those feedbacks of what needed to happen in the judge deliberation. What's going to be very new with respect to phase 4 is in the upper row here, you see the kind of yellow and blue boxes that are highlighted. If you go back one, Sonny. Previous slide.
I'm trying. For some reason, my keyboard does not want to let it go back. So
there we go. So what's going to be very different here in phase 4, as I was suggesting, the yellow and blue boxes on the top line, is we're going to have a relatively large portion of the scoring coming from on-site results. So we'll still have the upfront submittal. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail in the subsequent slides, the on-site data results. And then another element of phase 4 represented in the blue box is you as a team have a task then post Muscatatuck, where you'll have some access to the judge's scoring and data with respect to your activities in Muscatatuck to essentially write and kind of self-reflect on a up to 5-page paper to send that back in, and that will be the final piece of the judging platform. So we anticipate that 5-page post-deployment or post-Muscatatuck paper would be to simply address anything that perhaps was exposed during the testing that you feel could be addressed, could be improved upon, or if there was feedback, for example, from a first responder that maybe your platform was difficult or confusing to use, then maybe you would have a chance to address some of those feedbacks. So if you want to move on, Sonny, now. And then just as a reminder before we advance, we'll be going from 10 teams down to 6 teams as a function of phase 4 to phase 5.
So Jason, just for a couple of pieces of clarity there. So this post-Muscatatuck response paper is basically in the rules. It says prototype live testing results, 5-page, section C of the rules. That's the document we're talking about there. You will not, because the testing will not have happened, you will not be able to submit that ahead of time, but the idea is you will be able to respond to the testing results after the event. And I think the other thing, just to provide some clarity, Jason, is the judges review and make the decisions. The subject matter expert comments and feedback are only to help the judges making more informed decisions. Those subject matter experts may have specialty technology or other backgrounds that help the judges understand the technology better or to make sense of it. But in the end, the judges make all the final scoring and decisions.
Okay. Yep. So here we are, November 2022 with our phase 4 kickoff. And then just to put the dates back out there, these are ideally will not change. So we have some alternative dates proposed based on weather itself. And then as we move on through office hours is what for both technical support, but also programmatic support, I think we'll start to release some idea of access to the site independent of our competition. So if there are some ideas that you might like to try in person, you might have a chance to do that in and around our phase 4 live testing. You can advance. So phase 4, so our rules overview. So just to highlight here in the very bottom center, the blue link August 22nd, August 2022. These are the rules that are the most recent and updated on the FRST challenge website. So that should be used until we suggest there are any supplements or additions to the rules. That should be the revision of the rules referenced for phase 4 preparation. So iterative to phase 3, there is that paper. So table of content requirements are in the official rules. The field ready prototype. So what we know in phase 3, there were a lot of really promising results, to say the least. A lot of very interesting field deployments and tests, specifically above and beyond phase 2, where it was still kind of that dev environment, really not much further than a white paper. So we had basically suggested this already. The field ready prototype, we don't expect for you to pass military grade non-destructive testing and industry requirements, but we also know that part of the scoring, part of the usability here is not only progress, but it's also the idea that our first responder customers are going to be the ones using your product. So the delicate nature with which they might have to hold a unprotected circuit board should be taken into consideration here. We're really looking for that near field ready prototype in this phase for that live field demonstration. So moving down the list here, so data and field trial review paper, post Muscatatuck to the judges. So that's going to be something new for you. And then as Sonny suggested, the overall submittal and team submittal process should be really thought of as a very inclusive submittal. So you can have the best product in the world, but if it costs $1 million a person, it might be hard for us to advance you. If you have, for example, not as accurate tracking, but you wrote a really good business plan, we're going to take that into consideration as long as you understand what you need to do to improve the performance of the product. And those were some of the things, to be, I think, very honest, that came down to who are the 10 teams here in phase 4. We had a lot of good results, but maybe there was a missing piece here and there. So again, please look at the overall items to include and understand that it's not just simply, did you build an accurate device? There's a lot to it, as one of our challenges within this mission here is to get a product to market out of this competition. And then again, kind of wrap that up, the video-based demos, both public and internal, and that public abstract. So those are all components that you can advance. So just as we did in phase 3, our rules per se are likely to be updated with final requirements. So most of the written rules likely will not change, as it really didn't change in phase 3. But with respect to data requirements, as we put out supplementary documents that explain not only the data format, but also update rates and those sort of things, we will be more than likely, as we approach phase 4, notifying teams of this is what you should expect. I would say for now, for people to put it in their mind, if you could think about REST API as kind of a template for how are you going to get data into our host system, a competition system, would be a pretty good roadmap for you to consider, and also pretty easily adaptable to the solutions we're going to propose to you for on-site at Muscatatuck. You can advance.
One thing that you didn't mention here is on the slide, Jason, that I think we need to mention is we will be announcing a date. So most of your materials will want before Muscatatuck, because we want the judges to have the chance to review your product plans, information about your prototype, et cetera, before arriving on site, so they can ask more intelligent questions and be able to make a better judgment of what they're seeing working in the field testing. So that will be no earlier than 2 weeks before the event, and we're going to make it as late as possible because we know the more time you have, the better for you. But we want to give the judges enough time to be able to review your documentation, your submissions before the field event. So we'll have more information coming out. So when you look at the dates of the field event, back up 2 weeks from that and say this is when things like your business plan and your product roadmap and those kind of materials will be due, because we want to give the judges enough time. Well, that may be short. It may be later than the 13th, but just assume the 13th for now.
Thanks, Sonny. Yep. So here's more or less a summary. So as you, a couple of weeks prior to coming to Muscatatuck, make that submittal from your team to the first challenge. Essentially what's described in our rules looks like the criterion for how they're going to be scored. So just as a reminder, there's an administrative panel that's going to look at criterion 0. That's simply a pass or fail. Did you essentially cover all the items, meet the objective of the submittal itself? And then criterion 1 and 2 are starting to come from a combination of the subject matter experts as well as your live field tests. So that's kind of criterion 2, a little bit of the newness with respect to phase 4. So criterion 1, strategic alignment to the overall vision and mission of the competition here, outcomes and progress. So even those teams that have a near market ready progress, there should still be some progress that they've made between phases 3 and 4. Technical outcome, of course, X and Y accuracy, but also repeatability, Z accuracy and repeatability, communication. So data, latency, interoperability, and I put a star there. So that interoperability is something that will be a little bit more prescriptive of as office hours and our kind of defined ground truthing platform starts to be presented a little bit more to the teams leading up to phase 4. And then again, criterion 3, this business plan and path to market. So are you in it for the customer, or this is kind of where we're going there. And again, I think there'll be some slides later that speak to Generator as an accelerator business consulting member of our program as well, and what that can look like. So just to consider here in phase 4, as you think about, well, I did pretty well in phase 3, my results are pretty good, so how do we make progress? So we're going to show a few slides now and speak to some of the scenarios that could be possible for phase 4. So again, so to consider here, scenarios, motion and movement, first responder, actors. So when I say actor, essentially, we're going to have people at Muscatatuck that are going to be using your products. And with that, kind of consider here the user experience. We know you know your platform and product probably better than anyone. You're the ones that made it. But now imagine putting it in your hands, in the hands of a first responder actor. They are going to have, you will have essentially very little time to explain to them, to provide some form of training or explanation on how to use it. So we're not going to completely expect them to do an unboxing and self-guided tour, but you are not necessarily going to be there with them every step of the way. So they might have to figure out how to provision themselves to a host system or whatever the setup procedure and process is. So now this is going to go a long way in the form of that user experience, and then this interoperability with ground truth. So many of the teams today have a pretty, I'll say, set method with which they're performing the localization and tracking. And then there's a variety of methods and manners with which people are actually sending that data to a tablet, a laptop, what have you. We're going to ask, and again, if you kind of roadmap this like a REST API format, an API format, how are we also going to basically take the data your device, your platform is making, and send that into a host system that's measured and monitored by us, the competition team. So details will follow. And then again, this last piece, self-reflection and strategy. So that's essentially referring to up to 5 pages of you having the ability to provide a written response to the judging panel on post-deployment. So with your data and the feedback of your system, you'll have a time window to provide that feedback to the judges. So you can advance. So some example scenarios. So example scenarios here, and I would encourage you to go online and look at Muscatatuck Training Center, Muscatatuck Urban Training Center, and you'll see it's quite an expansive campus. Sunny will speak to that in a little bit, but you'll see a sampling of the kind of structures and opportunities that we have to essentially test your systems. So, consider the house fire, the active shooter, search and rescue. And in this phase, given where we are with development as well as prize money or finances, we're going to be asking you to track a single node. I can put an asterisk on that. If people have a platform that is dependent upon mesh networking, P2P, these sort of things, you can bring as many nodes as you want, but we're effectively going to be taking the data from one node. If there's a unique nuance to that statement with respect to your team, I'm certainly happy to have that conversation with you offline if it's not something that you want to discuss in the larger group. So again,
Jason, this is Josh. I have a question about this. So we're not as focused on ruggedization yet. So when we say house fire, we're not actually going to have a house on fire, right?
I hope not. I don't think so.
So it'll be simulated,
right? Yeah, I think we have to look at the. I think there is the potential to have maybe some smoke in a controlled environment, but certainly in phase 4 we won't have a live fire situation. So anyways, as you again kind of navigate around a virtual tour of the Muscatatuck Urban Training Center, you're going to see residential structures, commercial or industrial that could look like a factory, even a subway, the underground system, institutional, hospitals, schools, a variety of I'll say deployment potentials on that campus. So again, if what we were doing was easy, it would already be done. So now consider these kind of deployments are very reflective, and actually the scenarios that we'll be putting your platforms through are being co-authored by first responders who actually administer training. So it's not just us saying walk a 45-meter loop around a car again. It's actually what first responders would use for real training purposes. And so you could advance, Sonny.
Sorry, Jason.
So, sir.
I have a question. So, on the house fire testing scenario, what would be the expected the range of temperature that like our device will have to experience?
Yeah. So again, we're not going to have live fire. If I were to make a suggestion without putting any branding around it, if you wanted to pursue some form of ruggedization, I would look at and I can provide the exact number later. There is an NFP, so National Fire Protection, NFP regulation for electronic devices. Within that standard, it basically lists some directives, and those directives point to IEC, so International Electric Code, basically standards. If you want to shortcut all that, go look at companies like Schott and MSA and Draeger and these companies that are supplying the market today. Look at their SCBA device and look at the environmental FCC and regulatory requirements in their technical documentation. So in general, if you were starting to build a platform, I would think that would be a pretty good market survey of what's out there that is industry expectations.
Thank you very much. I will look into it.
Yeah, so just to clarify, phase 4, we're not anticipating significant ruggedization testing. We assume that's a phase 5 goal, and that's sort of what this slide is also speaking to. And so it's not that the scenarios will be authentic. So, the equipment could get banged up a pretty good amount, and you have people walking, crawling, doing whatever they're doing. As those role players are going through those authentic activities using authentic equipment. But things like exposure to fire, water, things like that are phase 5 ruggedization tests. So you won't have to worry about that this time. The scenario may be authentic short of the fire being there. So think of it that way. What would happen here? But we're not testing ruggedization, but it's not that the devices will be treated gently either. If firefighters doing what they're doing, there's going to be natural kind of level of ruggedness you're going to need to have. So Jason, I'll turn this back to you.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's a good way to think about it as well. So, ideally those that progress on to phase 5, there may be very well something like a non-destructive test set up and as part of the overall deployments and competition for phase 5. Okay, you can advance, Sonny. Yep. So again, this is
hey, Jason, on that last slide, because we kind of talked to it, but since we skipped past it, it did have a point there. Let me go back. So the last part here is, because of the first responders will not be in there like treating your devices gently. If they're crawling or doing whatever they're doing, they're going to do it the way they would do it. So you need to be prepared in case one of your devices gets damaged in, say, test 1, that you're able to respond and have a device ready for test number 2. So do realize that while we're not testing ruggedization, these won't be gentle testing necessarily. So you just want to make sure that you're prepared if something happens and one of your devices is damaged or whatever, because that could be important and prevent you from future tests if you only have one version of anything. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
Yep. So again, kind of moving in that same theme, the first responders using your product, your team is going to observe them. So you can do a little bit of coaching up front, but again, to be as true to a simulated scenario as we can be, you're not going to be attaching things to them. You're not going to be connecting cables to them and walking through the facility and then giving them the ability to go. So part of that leads into that iteration beyond phase 3. How far are you progressing beyond phase 3? Can somebody that didn't actively work on the development team use this platform, right? So again, it doesn't have to be like a first unboxing, but it also can't be so dependent upon you placing beacons and anchors and tags and strapping things on and booting things up and so on and so forth. It's got that will be a component of our first responder actor feedback rubric, is that user experience. So please take that into account.
One of the things that I would suggest to teams is, if you're not able to get to that final form factor at phase 4, and there's some aspect that you clearly document it for the role players and the judges, that it's maybe done this way for phase 4, but by phase 5, it'll be changed in some way. I don't know what that might be, but there's something about the size, some of the form factor or some other issue. You'll want to make that clear because they're going to be judging based on what they see in front of them, not just what you're assuming they know. So these role players will not necessarily have read any of your materials that you've submitted for the judges. So you'll want to make sure that whatever these role players are provided with, they're able to actually use your system and actually understand how it would really operate. So if that's going to change between phases 4 and 5, and that, you'll want to somehow help them understand that difference. And I don't know what that might be, if that's even relevant to any of your teams. Let's say it weighs 10 pounds, you're going to have it down to 1 ounce. You want to say that it's not going to be a 10-pound weight, it's going to be 1 ounce weight, but we haven't done that miniaturization yet, or whatever, whatever the issue may be. So I think there was a hand raised.
Yeah, hi, that's me. So I have a quick question. Will we know the exact testing scenarios later on before the actual test date in Muscatatuck?
To a degree, yes. With any sort of detailed information, no. So we may say indoor residential, and you're to take that as the most common house that you'd find in a residential suburb. We may say hospital, that is 4 floors, and from a pre-planning, that's maybe about all you're going to get. I don't know if Josh would like to comment any more there, and then we do have another hand raised.
No, I don't want to comment anymore there. We'll give ideas. We have pictures of subways. We'll be able, I think, to define what buildings there are, but paths we won't be able to define in advance, or we will choose not to define that in advance, or reveal that, I guess is the right word. But we can say what kind of buildings, and we might have like a time limit that we would define. Track somebody over 20 minutes, so something along those lines. But yeah, we don't want to let too much. We don't want to define too much previously.
And I think some of that mindset is going to be more or less reflective of, the local first responder agency. You may have some facilities like hospitals, schools, large employment centers that have pre-planning, maps on hand and more information, but to the most mundane, 2-story, 2,300 square foot residential home in the US, nobody really knows that floor plan except the builder, if it's digitized anywhere.
Gotcha. I mean, what I was more curious about was, would we be informed like, hey, in this specific testing scenario, there will be smoke or something like that ahead of time?
We may say something like house fire, or 911 call, or search and rescue, but we won't necessarily know if there's smoke or not. And imagine in the real world, somebody pulls a fire alarm, you're dispatching the fire department. Only when you get there, you found out it was a prank, or the fire was contained before your services were needed. So we'll see.
Cool, thank you.
We had more hands. If Jock, I couldn't honestly tell between Eric and Jock who was first. So,
all right. So let me go there. Hi everyone. This is Jacques-Étienne Grandjean from Team Business Crescendo Cisneros. Yeah, my question was around the assumptions around the communications network that may or may not be available throughout the facility. So what should be the assumption for the phase 4 scenarios? Would either 4G or public 4G or Wi-Fi be available throughout the structures or not?
So on the Muscatatuck campus, I think we will provide prior to the competition. You can essentially a coverage map. So for those teams that are leveraging LTE as far as a backhaul of sorts, communication technology of sorts, it should be pretty public information on what carrier services are provided there. In general, we're not providing that. If we ask that you send data from your host system into our host system for kind of side-by-side tracking, if you will, it will determine if that's only going to be one way or if we have multiple ways. So I would imagine LAN connection or wireless LAN connection. It won't necessarily be through a public cloud back down to our system.
Okay.
Is that okay for now, Jacques?
Yeah, that's good enough now. Thank you very much.
So the Muscatatuck campus, and I realize you guys were relatively new to the competition. That campus is pretty unique in terms of its military and overall disaster training. We do have the ability on that campus to essentially deny GPS and deny communication. I don't believe that we'll deny cell service for this competition, but I would encourage you to research the site and perhaps work on some level of redundancy, if at all possible, as just reflective with some of our first responder partners that even more specific in the Western US or rural Midwest, you may not have cell coverage in all areas. So it may be authentic to that in Muscatatuck. All right. Sonny, are we able to advance? Oh, and I think there's Eric from Bank 3 also had a hand up. Sorry, Eric.
No, it's all right. Sorry, I'll be quick. I was just curious, on the test site, will you provide us AC power for the places we're at, like for our laptops and our antennas and things like that? Or do we need to bring generators or batteries or cars, et cetera, et cetera?
I think, go ahead, Sonny. It looked like you were going to speak.
Do you mean during the testing itself?
Yeah, like let's say you bring me to like test house number 1. It's a residential house. You're like, all right, we're going to set up here. You guys are going to run a test. Do I have an extension cord to make sure my laptop is charged and to plug in one of my receivers, or do I need to bring all the power too?
So we will have power on site. We can't guarantee that it will be at every single location. I mean, this is a large sprawling campus, and so we'll be partly dependent on what infrastructure Muscatatuck has in place. I would encourage, so this is something we can discuss as we get closer to the event and we know more about some of those kind of questions from the facility. So there may be places where it's just not feasible to have that available. Certainly you'll have access to, while you're there, there'll be a room, there's a place on site, they call it's a schoolhouse, where each of the teams will have a private room with a lot more that you'll be able to work, before, after, during testing, when you're not needed out in the field, where you can do things like charging, things like that. If you need power on site, one of the things I would encourage you to consider is, what if your product's being deployed in an area where the power grid's down, is your device usable without plugging it into something? And so the portable generator, things like that, those are all part of your kind of design. I don't think we'll want to require you to bring generators out to the site for the most part, because that's, unless that's part of your product design.
No, one part of our product design is being attached to a fire truck, but I don't think I'm going to bring a fire truck out there with me. So
Right, exactly. So we'll need to get back to you on that once we get some specifics from the Muscatatuck on what is what's accessible at each of the building locations that we'll be at. And so we don't actually know that data at this moment. And that's actually a good question. We'll need to figure out the answer to.
So Sonny, like from a practical standpoint, since we'll have judging equipment that we'll be using all day long, we're probably
Right.
going to not be able to operate on battery alone, the judging platforms. So I would be willing to guess this, like if they had laptops just for analysis, not part of the product, but for analyzing the product, then that's probably going to be realistic.
Right. And I was really thinking more, okay, they need, somebody's wanting to be, 20 meters away from the testing building, but we can't get power for 50 meters away. That, how close it'll be to the actual testing location, things like that. We just need to work out some of those logistics with the site as we get to that level of planning for each of the testing locations, which we haven't done. But Josh is right. We'll probably certainly have our own power needs at each of those locations. So I think you'll be pretty safe, but that's something we will address as we get closer to the event and have more details from the testing facility.
So let's see. The last little summary of this. So the first responders will use your prototype. What do you need to provide?
There's another hand up, Jason, just so you know.
Yes.
Hi,
You go.
Jason. Some follow-up questions. How many firefighters in each testing scenarios will we deploy our devices on?
So we're only asking for a single node to be monitored. And then I think kind of goes back earlier, I just suggested if you had a system that relied upon mesh, P2P, something like that, let us know and we'll figure out something for you. If, for example, let's just say you had a physical product that required a person to be fitted for, you might want to necessarily consider how does that become adaptable and usable, because I couldn't tell you if it's a 2.5 meter, if it's a 2 meter tall person or a 1.5 meter tall person. If it's a large man or a very, very small person, I couldn't tell you who they are going to be from an overall physical, persona.
Okay, I see. And then one more question on the user interface. Were we expecting the data to be transmitted to a command, like a simulated command centers, or like it would be preferable for the firefighter actors to take a look at where they are on maybe a tablet or smartphones?
I think that's a couple of things in that question. Your platform can be how your platform is designed. And we have a host system. Don't consider our host system as part of the deployment, but rather we want to be able to receive the data your platform does in parallel so that we can essentially quantify your results. So if you have a tablet, a smartphone, a laptop on the fire ground itself, or in some level, the next time you walk past a police car, you might very well see a tablet bolted to the dash that they're able to remove when they need to. In the fire scenario, you may have a site commander who has kind of a scoreboard. In many cases, it's a Velcro tagging label. More and more, they're starting to have a tablet in their hands that is checklists and annotation capabilities and so forth. So
I see. And then so our real-time solutions will have to be transmitted simultaneously to the hosting site that provided by the first challenge.
yes.
Okay, and then do we have an idea of like what data format, what kind of communication protocols we'll have to adapt in order to be compatible with the system?
So we, a little bit earlier in this presentation, we kind of suggested that we will have a supplement to the rules between now and a reasonable amount of time before phase 4. That's going to be similar to phase 3, where we kind of prescribe the data format, CSV file, and so forth. In this case, I think that data format is relatively as true to industry expectations for mapping as we could make it. And then if you were to start road mapping, how would I send that? We will more than likely provide some API structure. So if you wanted to look at whatever, Esri, Google Maps, IMDF from Apple, all of those mapping formats have a relatively similar API. So imagine if we have a dark map, if you will, a secret map of the building. You want to be sending your data into us via an API that's pretty similar to what you're going to find in Google Developer, Apple Maps, and so forth. ArcGIS. Yep.
I see. Thank you very much. And then just to clarify, the data form is one thing, and then how are we going to transmit the data? Is it through, for example, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or maybe some other communication?
Yep. So for us, I think we'll make provisions so that that's starting to look like either LAN or wireless LAN.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Sunny, I think you can advance. So, yeah, so this is, again, I think what's loosely hidden into this statement. So ensure you understand, the kind of tasks first responders perform and how they do those tasks authentically. So within the FRST portal, there are some, from a learning perspective, some YouTube videos, also first responder training scenarios. We probably during our office hours coming up between now and phase 4 could very well likely substitute some of the technical office hours with industry office hours, where you have first responder panels that, that may talk through some of their training scenarios. So when, again, equipment they use, if you have a device that straps onto a person exactly where their air tank would go, and you suggest that they may need to not use an air tank, you can imagine how well that's going to go over with the fire department. Body movements, if, for example, you're using physical sensing and some form of sensor fusion integration, you might consider that not every deployment is done with a standard gait walking. So take that to mean whatever you think it means. Environmental conditions, if your platform is essentially using RF to network nodes back and forth, maybe it would be, some consideration of what does that, RF pattern do when air is ionized or, in extreme heat. We won't necessarily have extreme heat in phase 4, but that would be, something to consider. I think Sunny mentioned earlier, water. With respect to the rugged conditions, one of the structures in Muscatatuck is a collapsed tower. So it's literally a building that's been demolished, and you might consider the fact that I have to crawl over rocks and building materials for the sake of search and rescue. So yes, it's outdoors, but if you looked at that coordinate on a Google map of the outdoor, you're never going to see the nuance of this collapsed structure, right? It's debris. So consider that. if people are crawling around debris, how might your physically worn product, look in an environment like that? I don't know if Sunny, Josh, if you have anything else to add here, or we can move on.
I think the only thing I would add is, think of not of all first responders and various kinds of scenarios. Don't just get focused on just one of the services. Think about them all, and really, you're going to have to make sure you're interacting with first responders to understand how they really do these tasks, not just how you imagine they do them. And because it's going to be really important, there are nuances in different types of, even the same mission, they're, say a residential house fire, they may move in different ways at different points in that mission. And so you want to understand, can your system, track that accurately and respond as they change the ways in which they're operating, whether they're fire, police, search and rescue, etc. So we'll be looking for that authenticity. We're not trying to do lab experiments here. We're doing field testing.
Yep, we're okay to advance. So now this, in phase 4, we had some best in class or special recognition awards. In I should say in phase 3, we had some special recognition awards. In phase 4, we have now a category which is described on page 40 of our rules that speaks to best in class. So again, while there's not one simple thing, one simple topic that's going to make you best in class, but if you could take away anything from the presentation today between 3 or 4 of us that are going to speak, it's really the inclusivity and advancement collectively of what we're putting out there as a phase 4 entry. So if you're really, really accurate, but again, it's $1 million a person, that may not exactly qualify as best in class. If you have a solution that's capable of tracking, but if and only if, a team of 3 people augment this stuff around a person, and we have a preconceived awareness of what they're going into, that probably isn't best in class yet. So we want it to be, reflective of the competition. Certainly not a minimal entry, and of the teams here, I can tell you at this point, I don't expect really any minimal entries anymore. It was tough enough to go from 30 teams down to 10. I'm really dreading the process of going from 10 to 6. I can tell you that. But again, so that best in class, so business plan, performance, usability, all these things, and you might even look at it from our perspective. Are they going to look like a really good competitor in phase 5? So, those would be maybe some of the stretch goals of phase 4 for best in class. So I think we can advance. So I'm going to let Josh take over here a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, thank you, Jason. So we're going to be doing live testing at Muscatatuck Urban Training Center. This is a federal military facility, so they take security seriously, and so there are some regulations that we need to satisfy in order to work. So anybody that's using any kind of radio will need to get approval to use that radio, and since we have it as part of the rules that you need to use wireless communications, we need to go through a few steps. One step is to get to register with the Federal Communications Commission. Some teams may already have a username and password for the FCC, but it's I went through the process. It took me about 10 minutes, and most of that time was taken up by waiting for an approval email. And the link is right here. And then you need to get an FRN. It's a Federal Communications Network number. I don't know what FRN. I don't remember what that stands for. But and again, if you're a large organization, you might already have one. Me personally, I didn't have one, so I set one up. It took just a couple minutes. And then so in the newsletter, you got a link to approvals page to deploy radios at military facilities. And so when you get to that page, and I have a link here, you want to set up a special temporary authority. This is a form that includes where you have to fill out your name, your company name, email address, this kind of stuff. And it's good for 6 months. And so we'll need to do this for phase 4 and for phase 5. And you'll be getting this information separately. And most of the questions, federal registration number. Thank you, Jason. Most of the questions in this form are easy. Questions 4 and 5 are specific to the competition. And it's on the next page. But please explain the area below why an STA is necessary. And I wrote, this is my text. And you may have different text to get the special temporary authorization, but we need to have this done as soon as you settle on a type of communications that you're going to be using. So, but these are pretty simple things. Then after you answer these questions, then there's one more form. When you click proceed, you go to another page and it says, what type of technology are you planning on using? Could be 2.4 gigahertz, it could be Wi-Fi, it could be cell phone. But in general, I think that most of the technologies we're going to be using will be deemed experimental. And it says on this form, if it's experimental, say experimental. But if it's commercial, state it's commercial. And I went through this process as an individual as opposed to representing IU, and it took me about 45 minutes total. So it shouldn't be too cumbersome. But just make sure that if you do anticipate changing, I would put in as soon as you can what's the known technology you're going to be using. And if you have to change, file a new special temporary authority form. And
I think
you can update it.
for those teams that are making their own hardware, as compared to those teams that may be using commercially available handsets or other tablets, generally speaking, if you went to your supplier's website, so say, again, not endorsing anything, I'm using Bluetooth mesh, and my device is from Nordic Semiconductor, and I have a whatever U-Blocks radio on there. The U-Blocks radio probably have some FCC declaration. So whether you buy it as an approved module or eventually you're going to be doing the approval on the apparatus or the appliance, you have essentially FCC listed components. Even in the proprietary UHF entries, you still have some frequency with which you're broadcasting through probably a commercially sourced radio or emitter or transceiver that has a document. So that's a little bit of this is procedural, and it basically just says you're not going to be doing something that inadvertently interferes with a military bandwidth, or if you're hitting a certain frequency that could be localized to that site, they just want to know who it is and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Muscatatuck is especially user focused. So they want people to come there and perform tests. So they will help enable this as much as they can. And like Jason just said, they just want to make sure there's not going to be any interference. So you can keep that in mind, but it is procedural. It's a hoop that needs to be stepped through. And so I don't know at this point how long the approval process takes. I know that the submission for approval takes only 45 minutes. So we'll probably have to run a test to see what kind of lead time it is. But I know that for most processes that require like things like stepping up the chain of command can take up to 90 days. And so don't wait until the end of December to submit. Do this before the end of the year. And we'll see if we'll run a test to see what the exact timing is, and which we need to do anyway for our own internal judging systems. So I think that's it. And I think maybe the next slide is about drone approvals. There's a similar process. There's another procedural process to follow if you plan on using drones. It looks like right now nobody is, but if you plan to, expect up to 90 days approval requirement.
And that's not because they have an anti-aircraft system over the competition, right?
Right. Right. No, but they are affiliated with another military base that's nearby, where they do work with drones that are military drones, and so they're concerned about that.
All right, I think it's back to me, and I think this is getting towards the end of my my piece here today. So again, as we progress through phase 4, certainly encourage you to attend office hours. If you feel like there are topics or let's say certain speakers or hosts beyond me, for sure, that could add to, you know, the quality of our competition here, please reach out, right? If we don't know there's something that you're missing, we might not offer it. So if again, if there's more or less topic suggestions, you know, please reach out. Again, kind of looking ahead to phase 5. So again, I always like to think of it as what's my X to Y by when? Where's this going on the roadmap to phase 5? And then think about, you know, what does that look like versus where you are and at the end of phase 3 here as a winner, right? As one of those teams that have advanced. And then what does that next, you know, incremental step look like? You know, nobody expects a box made out of unobtainium that's going to manage 1,000 degrees right now. But, you know, some of the entries, you know, think about how that would look if a person with gloves on had to use that device. What's it going to look like if a person's crawling over rocks and those sort of things? How do you move forward here? So again, this you know, kind of considerations, scenario preparation, you know, think about all the possible deployments you're going to have. What would this look like for a you know, an EMT or a firefighter, you know, or a police going into a certain scenario? Usability, market readiness, you know, where are you? And what does that roadmap look like is another big component of the submittal. And then essentially here, looking out into phase 5, we will be asking that you start to now track multiple responders. We haven't put an exact number on that yet, but I would suggest that that's minimum is 4, as high as 12, just for the sake of economics here. So in theory, this system, you know, can allow up to 2,000 connections. We're not really concerned with that right now, unless you're going to self-finance 2,000 nodes. We have no real way to prove you wrong. So imagine that, you know, somewhere out in the future, 4 to 12 nodes would be, I think, a reasonably financially suitable demonstration. And then again, we'll be coming out with special topic competition. So I know some of the teams that have advanced here to phase 4 have actually pivoted from some of their initial ideas. And, you know, if some teams were going to come back to those or even find, you know, another team to work with for special topics, that might be interesting for you to consider as well. It's just one more way for us to not only build a community, but make some meaningful contributions to our first responder market. So if you want to advance, Sonny. So I think that's it for me. So again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to go through the FRST portal. I check it regularly, or I think Haley, the info at First Responder sheet, they can parse those out to whoever you have specific questions for. And unless anybody has any questions, I'm gonna tune out and hand it over. Thanks.
And we'll have chance for questions at the very end as well. So I see some hands raised. So we can go ahead and take those questions.
Yeah, is it Michael?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for the presentation. I had a question. Is there a limit to the number of people that can visit the site? We're planning on bringing 3 people. Is this too much, or?
No, you can bring essentially any number of people that you want to bring, even if you have like stakeholders you might be engaging with and you'd like to see them to see your product in live field setting. We can even consider hosting them there as well. I have some more slides here, and I'm going to address some of those type of issues in a minute.
All right, thanks.
Someone else had a question?
I think it was Eric from Bank 3.
Yeah, I was before you were talking about having the first responders want to be able to just grab your system and use it themselves. We usually set up our antennas. Our idea was to set them up on, like I said, a fire truck. Now we've just been emulating that by nailing them into the dirt. Will we be able to set up our own antennas, or does that whole system have to be set up by the first responder before he uses it?
So I think that's going to be dependent on the number of actors we have access to. If we only have, for example, 1 actor and our 2 actors, if it's not feasible, I think that's something we can be flexible with. If you need a team of 10 people to set up the antennas, or you need 15 minutes, then that's probably going to be a no-go. But
hey, Jason, if I could maybe address this slightly differently. So if this would normally be something to be on the truck, and the truck arrives and it has the antenna on it, and you're simulating that truck that arrived by setting up the antenna ahead of time, but it would really be arriving on the truck. I assume, Jason, is acceptable, because it's not something a responder would normally do. They wouldn't set it up when they got to the site. It would just be on the vehicle.
Yeah, that's the idea. Otherwise, I got to bring something with me.
Right. Does that make sense, Jason, the way I answer that?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to add that if we're thinking about actual scenarios, if you have a truck with 3 people on it, well, if we have 1 actor, then you can have your own other 2 people be involved as if they were there. So we want things to be as authentic as possible. And if we have we should probably have multiple actors. But if we have not as many as an authentic situation, we'll make accommodations.
There was another hand raised, I believe.
Hi, Sonny. On logistic questions. So let's say when we're doing the live testing and our device is also collecting data, is there any logistic issues if we want to share that data, to discuss with somebody else because it was collected in a military simulation site?
No, there will not be any issues with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So unless there's another question, I'm going to move forward. Okay. So I think Jason's addressed this pretty well so far. Just keep in mind that we're going to be looking across the full spectrum of your products, not just technical accuracy as we move forward. And ruggedization will definitely be something we're looking at in phase 5, but you will need some level of ruggedization to be able to withstand just natural authentic activities of the first responders in phase 4. You'll receive more information about special topic competition. Your team may or may not want to respond to that. That'll be technically a separate competition from the main one, the one you're in. And that'll be a place where folks have specialized technologies. They're not trying to do what you're trying to do, but they have parallel technologies that somehow impact the field. And that could be anywhere from a sensor to an algorithm to a specialized use case. So that competition will be released once we have the rules approved by NIST. And so that will be announced at some point in the next month or so. There was a hand raised.
Oh, sorry, you just answered my question by saying it would be announced in a month or so. Thank you.
Yes, we basically have to go through legal review, and we never have control of that process. So as soon as that comes out, then that will be, these will be smaller prizes, the $20,000 to $40,000 range size prizes, but it's a one-time thing. So it'll be you submit and win, or you don't. There won't be a multiple phase competition is the current thinking. Okay, so Muscatatuck, Jason mentioned this earlier. This is an overview of the site. You can go Google it. Be sure and take a look. Any of the structures there are potential candidates for testing in phases 4 and 5. And our goal is authenticity and broad use across first responder use cases. So one of the reasons we're vague partly on the scenarios is because we don't want you designing to the test. We want you designing for the audience. We will provide authentic use cases in our testing. We're working with first responders to create those scenarios using, designed around the types of buildings and facilities available to us at Muscatatuck. Again, some more Muscatatuck kind of images there, just to give you a breadth of the kind of facilities. So on site, so this is subject to change, but this is how we're currently looking at the week for phase 4, and there'll be a similar setup for phase 5. Monday arrival setup, you'll be given a private room with a key and a lock on the door in one of the buildings where you can store your materials, you can work privately, you'll have internet access, etc. There'll be a practice testing area in that building where you can, if you just want to make sure your equipment survive travel, things like that, you can use that. So Monday will be set up sort of for orientation, familiarization. Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to hopefully be able to do all our testing, logistics, those 2 days. And that'll be randomly assigned. And that's the fairest way for teams is to say, we're going to randomly assign you an order to the testing and when teams are assigned to time slots. And then Thursday and Friday, we have reserved the facilities, and our goal is for you to be able to use these facilities to further test and refine your technologies on site. You may have access to the buildings we tested in on the first 2 days. So Thursday and Friday is non-judging. There's no risk. The idea is you have access to a facility that many of you may not have access to. How can you use that time to test and refine your technology? Maybe go back through a test to see maybe why your system failed at a certain test or didn't perform as you expected. So the idea is that you're on site. Can you make use of those facilities to improve your product in a non-judged environment? And you may have, and we may have potential partners, customers, investor type folks on site in phases 4 or 5 that might want to look at your product, talk to your team, things like that. So our goal is, especially in phase 5, is to engage some number of stakeholders to come on site and actually interact with teams. Part of what we do as our job on this competition is to help expose you to the stakeholder community, folks who might want to buy or invest in your technology, your team, help it get to market. And so we'll be doing some of that kind of work, less in phase 4 than phase 5, but there may be some level of that in phase 4. You also may have folks you want to invite out to see your product in action, a potential customer, a first responder partner, etc. So we'll be communicating more about this schedule as we kind of move forward. And but if you know for sure at some point that there are folks beyond your team you want to invite out to be at the facility, especially these last couple of days of the week, let us know and we can talk about the logistics of that. This slide I've been using since the beginning of FRST. This is sort of our framework for success. We're trying to provide a multifaceted competition here, not just run testing. So one of the newest programs we have is that we're just starting up is the generator program. So this is a team that we're basically have contracted with to help run a version of what they call the G Beta program. This is a non-cash price for the teams. And so basically business planning is going to be an important part of the judging going forward, 10% in phase 4. And so, our concern at Indiana University and NIST's concern in funding this project is that you're really going to make products for the first responder market, that you really are serious about bringing a product to market that's going to save lives. We view the win in this competition. Of course, we want to run a good competition, but the win here is product on market. The first responders can really buy your products and use them in the field in the relatively near term. And so part of this is you understanding how you're going to make this in a product and convincing the judges you have a good idea of what that means, pricing, sales strategies, all those kind of things. Generators here to help you do that. So they'll do a combination of group sessions, one-on-one mentoring with their team, one-on-one sessions with mentors that will help them arrange, and they'll arrange to talk to your teams, to give advice, strategic advice, things like that. So I encourage you to participate in that program. It's modeled off of a successful program they call G Beta. This will be just, they do customized versions of that for different areas. Like they just finished one on 5G. So they had a cohort of teams, focused on 5G, and they've done it in a variety of different areas. In this case, it would be public safety, indoor tracking, that kind of stuff. So that program, is kicking off very soon. So I think most of you have signed up already for it. Yeah, I encourage you to consider joining together with either, even teams that are on this call, the finalist teams. You could potentially join together and have a stronger team than what you have now. You could go back and look at the teams that were in phase 2 that were eliminated in phase 3. There were a lot of good teams and technologies that were eliminated because we only had 10 positions to award for this phase to move into phase 4. And so I would encourage you to look and say, are there certain teams or technologies? You think in terms of talent, think in terms of actual technology or an intellectual property those teams have. They may be interested in teaming with you. So you can go back, and on the FRST portal, there's a link to all the phase 2 teams public videos and abstracts. You can go back and look at those and look for maybe compatible technologies or teams. And of course, phase 3 winning team videos and abstracts are online on the FRST portal as well. There's a link on the left-hand navigation for all 3 phases so far of the abstracts, and then starting at phase 2 and 3 with the public videos. Those videos are also available on our YouTube channel. So there's a lot of good talent and capability that we had to eliminate for just the logistics of how many teams we can handle at Muscatatuck. If I were in your position, I would be going out and looking to say, were any of those eliminated teams good potential collaborators as you move into phase 4? The public abstracts you submitted for phase 3, this is always true if you want to change any of that. Because we're pushing people through social media and through other channels. We're putting the message out for people to come look at your videos, look at your abstracts. If you want to change any of those, if you want to update your video, you want to update your public abstract, let us know. We can update those things. If you get a new team logo, any of those kind of things we can update on our sites, because we're trying to use these as a way to market and promote your teams to stakeholders, people who might be customers, people who might be investors, et cetera. They're going to be going and looking at these materials. So if you didn't have enough time, you rushed out a video and you want to do a better one, we can work on replacing the one you submitted already with a new one. So you view this as marketing, these public abstracts and videos, because we and NIST and others are pushing people to go look at these things in a way to engage the stakeholders. So this is a chance for us to promote you and your team in the best light possible. Team growth, really think about growing your teams across technical improvement. First responder focus can emphasize, no matter how good your technology is, that the first responders, subject matter experts and judges and SMEs, and then phase 4, the role players who are using your technology, if they don't think this really works well for this market, that will be, that you won't be judged as high, even with like a perfect product, a perfect technical product that's not well designed for how these people really work. So you want to really make sure that you keep a first responder focused and that you're really thinking about the commercialization. And then next steps, sometime in January, we will we'll reach out to you, get confirmation you're going to attend phase 4, and then disperse travel funds and plenty of time for you to make use of those funds to arrange for and pay for your travel. We are working on now, we haven't worked out the logistics, but Muscatatuck's out in the rural area, and it's not very close to food or lodging. And so they have catering capabilities on site with vendors and on-site lodging. So we're working with them now to figure out what that would look like. And then we'll send out communication on that. But the ideal will be this, that we arrange lodging on site and catering on site, but the cost of that would be deducted from your travel funds. So we would communicate with each of your teams individually to understand, do you want to drive the 30 minutes from the nearest interstate every day to back and forth, or do you want to stay on site and food and things like that. So as we get some clarity from Muscatatuck and our coordination there, we'll get that out to you. But that's going to be something that we think is important for you to consider, is staying on site. The accommodations aren't as luxurious as a hotel, but the convenience and being on site and being able to access the facilities without all the driving potentially be helpful for the teams. Liability insurance. This is in the rules. So be sure and go read page 47 of the rules. Every team you cannot show up at Muscatatuck without proof of your liability insurance. So you can read the rules for what's required in that liability. This is required by Muscatatuck facility. The DoD requires you to have this coverage in place. And so it's based off of their requirements and the university. So it lists who has to be covered by the liability insurance, et cetera. So we'll need that documentation at least a month ahead of time. And we're not going to verify that you have perfect liability coverage. That's your team's responsibility. So we don't want to take the legal liability saying, yeah, you have adequate coverage. That's your responsibility, but you do need to provide us the documentation that you have that coverage in place. And so you want to make sure that's done. Muscatatuck may have a form you have to fill out documenting that you have that liability to be able to come to the facility and test your product. And it's subject to change. We don't control Muscatatuck's rules, so they could change their liability requirements at any time. If they do, we'll notify you that what's in the rules has been changed by the military. And do not wait till last minute. This can take a while to arrange. So you want to make sure you've arranged the liability coverage well in advance, so that you know that you can have the policy in place before a month out before the event. So if you have any questions on that, let us know. But really what's in the guidelines is what we're looking for. And those are based off, like I said, DoD requirements or Muscatatuck requirements. Office hours, we have both commercialization and administrative and technical folks online every week or every couple of weeks going forward. So look for those office hours and attend if you have questions. We're looking to put together more training education events. We're in discussions with FirstNet Authority, the government side of FirstNet, who's pushing out standards and technologies and things like that and making you aware of them. And we will do review the rules for phases 4 and 5, because you want to be thinking towards where the end goal is here, but really understand phase 4. And sometime between now and January, we will probably have another of these webinars. We get in a little bit more detail about the testing and scenarios and planning requirements. And so be able to look out for that email. And see, there's a question there. So, and that's where we are now. So what was this comment here? Oh, Jason had to leave. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? I'll hang on here for a minute or two. If you have any questions, we'll have office hours. You can always send us an email, info@firstchallenge.com. And but if you have questions, go ahead and ask those.
So there's
is
a
there-
question in chat, Sonny.
Okay. Yes, the recording of this call will be on our YouTube channel. As soon as the video service processes the video, we'll get it posted. So certainly I would expect by tomorrow the video will be online.
This is Eric from Bank 3. Two kind of disjointed questions. First, do you have any like thoughts or ideas of what like the first or second year revenue target should be for the business plan? Are we looking for like a VC, everything's going to explode into hundreds of millions of dollars? Or are you looking for like a realistic how we're going to go to market plan there? And the second question is, do you think our equipment needs to get wet at the training center?
So phase 4, I'll answer this last one first. So for phase 4, we're not planning strict ruggedization testing. Phase 5, you should assume it's going to get wet. You should assume exposure to high heat, all the authentic kind of environmental conditions. Probably the only environmental condition we'd probably change in phase 4 would be smoke. But we're not going to do the high heat or water, things like that, kind of ruggedization testing in phase 4. So, but you do want to prepare for be ready by phase 5 to know that you can withstand a level of ruggedization from authentic kind of scenarios. And how that's done, we'll talk about more for those finalists. As far as the business plan, we don't have the right answer for that. And if we did, it's going to depend on your team. What is your business model? What is your product? We have some teams, for instance, that are packaging multiple capabilities together where indoor tracking may be only a part of their package. And so what their revenues and sales projections and go-to-market strategies are might be quite different than a team that's only targeting selling, say, an indoor tracking product. So we can't give you the answer to that. Just know that we'll have commercialization experts, business people, investor types looking at those business plans as part of the evaluation process, as part of our subject matter expert panel, providing input to the judges and feedback to them on aspects of the commercialization. So there's not a right answer to that. It's what's the best answer for your team. I would say you want to be realistic. One of the rules of thumb I've always used, you can take it for what it's worth, it's just a personal opinion. I was told this by an investor years ago, was show me your financials, your projections. I don't believe them. They're aspirational, but they tell me how you think about the problem. They tell me how you think about the scope of the opportunity. And if you show a hockey stick, we're going to make $1 billion in 2 years, and we're going to go from a sell of 1 and in 700 days we're going to have $1 billion sales. I'm not probably going to believe you. So how do you get there? That sort of bottom-up analysis. What can first responders afford? Where does this fit in the technology stack of what they're buying? All maintenance and support, and not just the initial cost, but what's it going to cost as is there other consumables here? All those kind of things go into play, other than just rough kind of sales projections. So obviously between phases 4 and 5, by phase 5 you probably have a more mature business plan. So you don't have to have the perfect anything in phase 4. You just need to be moving along that technology stack. That technology and business planning capabilities. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Another question?
Professor Kirkley. So regarding the response document that we have to submit after the event, is it based on some kind of a written feedback that we'll get during the event,
Yeah.
or is it?
Yes. So in January, we'll provide more information on that. What you'll be provided with and what you'll need, what we'll be looking for you to do. But the high level rule of thumb is we'll collect data about the performance of your product, your prototype. And you'll want to take that data that we're providing. Here's what our judging system has about your product and how it performed, and help the judges understand that. Maybe there's a place in it where you perform really well and you want to explain why, or maybe a place in that data where the system glitched and it didn't do well, but you know how to address that problem, or it's a known problem that you're working on for phase 5. So the idea is that we don't just take the raw data and raw results that we're getting. You have a chance to help the judges understand what they're seeing in the data. Is kind of the broad rule of thumb. You'll get more details on that probably in January when we do a webinar again, just getting ready for the actual event. And our goal is, I think those will be due, I think, within a week of the field event. So you'll have a week to look at the data and try to understand and help the judges understand what they're seeing in the data.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Another question?
Yep. So one question is around the typical duration of the test scenario. Do you have any feel for what would be the typical duration? Is it like 20 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour or more?
If that has not been specified in the rules, I'm having to go back to the rules. Let's see if that's, yeah. So if you go into rules criteria 2, it says like monitor XY position along each course over a time scale of up to 20 minutes and through several rooms and barriers. So I would go to the rules and that's the guidance you have for now. If we have changes in the rules, which we anticipate, there'll be some, not major changes, but just some refinements of details, like that number might be changed to 15 minutes or things like that, then we'll announce those, within a couple of months is the estimate, ahead of time before the event, as we're ready to release that information. But the rules, any guidance we have on that now is going to be in the rules document.
So I'd like to add one thing here. There's a practical limit to how long we can take for each task, because there are 10 teams. We can't do 3 hours per team. That's just, it would be impossible. But in phase 5, when we do ruggedization, we might be able to say test battery life. And that might end up being longer, but not in phase 4.
Yeah, okay. And the other question I have is, suppose we have 2 versions of our prototype, like a low end and a higher end version. Is there an opportunity to test 2 different versions of the prototype?
For the official testing, you would have to choose which one of the prototypes you wanted to be tested. And we don't anticipate having teams do 2 different tests, formal judged test with during the event. One of the reasons we limited it to 10 teams was frankly because of the amount of time it's going to take to test each team. Now, access to the facilities, if you want to test it yourself in those buildings or other buildings we may have available, there may be opportunities for you to test multiple devices or variations of your device after our formal testing is over. But for the formal test, you'll need to choose which version you actually want to have in the judging competition.
All right, very clear. Thank you, Sonny.
Yeah, but we encourage you, if you have variations of your product, you want to try out some experimental algorithms after we've done the judging while you're on site. That's why we're trying to keep the facility available and open, the buildings rented and all that stuff, so that you can have access to do your own testing and work beyond our judging, because many of you may not have access to those types of facilities normally.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure. Any other see another hand raised?
Yeah, hi. So I have a couple of questions about this special topics competition.
Yes.
So first of all, will there just be one like special topics competition, or will they be multiple? Will there be multiple for different topics? And then also, will there be like multiple winners for those, or will there just be one winner?
Yeah, so the rules are still being, so this is still the official language is, this is an anticipated launch of a competition. It's not formal until the official rules get released. So legally we're anticipating launching this competition. Basically, there'll be one broad topic that people can respond to, but it allows a lot of variability in what people submit. And so there'll be multiple awards, and those awards will range from $20,000 to $40,000 each, and there'll be up to 4 to 8 awards, depending on the size of the award. So the judges have some discretion on whether they give one team 40 and another team 20 and another team 30. There's a pool of funds, $160,000 that we're pulling from, that will be awarded through that. Just keep in mind that competition is anything that's not the main competition. So we're not looking for people to submit an alternative indoor 3D tracking infrastructure-free solution. They should be in the main competition if that's what they're proposing. This is for parallel, ancillary, additive capabilities that the main competition is not addressing. Or if you have, say, a sensor or an algorithm and you want to submit that for an award. And so the rules will define what it means to win an award and the kind of topic areas that we're looking for.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? So not hearing any. Oh, somebody came off mute.
Professor Kirk, one other question. You had 2 dates listed in one of the slides. One is end of September and then first week of April. It said weather event. So what does it mean?
Okay, so wait, what can you tell me again what that was?
Yeah, I think it was in one of the earlier slides. You said it's I think I noted it down somewhere, March 27th to 31st or April 3rd to 7th.
Oh, yes.
And so it's not, when would we know which dates and all that?
So March 27th to 31st, the planned date. If we say, it's Indiana, so we could have a nice spring day, or it could be 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so it should be nice, and we scheduled it then because typically that's not going to be a heavy snowstorm kind of season, but if something happens, we could. So if we won't know until it's basically a weather date. So the planned date is March 27th through 31st. If 3 days out, we find out that there's a major winter storm coming through and physically getting from the airport to Muscatatuck in rural Indiana, you may not be able to drive there, literally. So it would take a fairly extreme weather event for us to move to that weather date. But if it looks like it's going to be unsafe conditions, then we would move it to that next week. But the plan is not to do that unless we absolutely have to. But it's something we wouldn't know until the event was happening, until we saw that weather event coming in.
Got it. Thank you.
Sonny, I have some more questions on the ground truth system. So
yes,
the ground truth system, is it like we're gonna attach additional sensors on the firefighters so that at the same time when our system is operating, the ground truth system is also operating, and then they're getting the same localization solutions?
So we will talk more about that aspect probably in the January timeframe, exactly what we're going to be doing our end and how we're going to take your data, things like that. So Jason alluded to some of that earlier in the conversation. So we'll provide more information on that in the January timeframe.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, but the intent is not to have anything that we're doing interfere with your technologies. So we're not going to be doing anything that would that we know is going to cause a problem with the performance of your systems.
Sure. Okay.
And I see one new message. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so we'll make this video available as soon as the server processes it, and we'll post on YouTube. And so, you know, tomorrow you should be able to send your teammates to the YouTube channel for First Challenge and see the video. And if you have any questions, let us know. We have office hours starting up next week, not this week, but next week. So, you know, always join those. Usually Jason and I are on those. Sometimes Josh, Max, and others are there. And then Generator is on the first half hour for the commercialization discussion. And so we tend to divide those into commercialization, first half hour, second half hour, administrative, and technical questions. Okay. Thank you, everybody.